The Cardinals finally find an easy win over the Rockies, but all it got them was a series split. After only taking 2 of 4 from Colorado, how is everybody feeling about this team heading into the off day? Coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you. It is Sunday evening, June 9th, 2024. The Cardinals secured the series split this afternoon over the Colorado Rockies at Busch Stadium. That is nothing to celebrate, of course, as we were pretty consistent coming into the series and throughout it, that the only acceptable result for the Cardinals this weekend would be a series win. But because that became impossible after Saturday's very eventful loss, if you missed the last podcast, go on and scroll back on your Spotify feed or on YouTube to check that one out because you missed a lot. But it meant that the Cardinals could only do what they could do on Sunday, which is split the series, and they did so successfully behind Andre Pallante, the current number 5 starter, who has truly been remaining in this role in a very day-to-day, week-by-week fashion. And the Cardinals continue to just be very extremely weird about the way they talk about and approach publicly this situation. But after a nice outing by Pallante on Sunday, 5 innings, scoreless, did his job, perhaps the Cardinals won't wait 5 more days to let us know that, oh yeah, he's starting today, as happened this morning when, and we talked about this on last night's episode, but the only other possibility is that Pallante is a bulk reliever behind somebody that's going to be an opener, which the Cardinals have typically never used openers, so I didn't really think that was too likely, but it was possible. I have no idea why the Cardinals just couldn't say last night it's Andre Pallante, and maybe Ollie Marmol kept it to himself out of spite because of the way last night's post-game press conference went. It was a fair question to ask. He did say he was going to let us know after Saturday's game, before Saturday's game, and then after Saturday's game came, and he didn't let us know, but whatever. This morning they said, yep, it's going to be Pallante, and Pallante did a nice job for the Cardinals. 5 scoreless. The offense did enough. 10 hits, 5 runs. The Cardinals win at 5-1 over Colorado, securing the series split. We'll talk about Pallante's outing, how the bullpen has largely continued to really be solid for the Cardinals outside of a little bit of a hiccup by Andrew Kittredge, obviously, on Saturday. This was a pretty productive series for the bullpen, and now they're all going to get a chance to rest because Ollie Marmol did use all of them with some level of frequency because of the number of shorter starts the Cardinals had in this series. It'll be good to get all of those guys the day off on Monday before you welcome the Pittsburgh Pirates to town, and that series is going to start with a bang because the man, the myth, the legend, Paul Skeens, will be the scheduled starter for Tuesday night at Busch Stadium, 6:45 first pitch, taking on Miles Mikolas. And Paul Skeens has set the league on fire early on in his big league career. The first overall pick out of LSU in last year's MLB draft. The Pirates waited way too long to bring him up in the first place. But the Cardinals will get their first glimpse at what is ostensibly now a division rival for them. And you could be seeing and probably will be seeing a lot of Paul Skeens in the years to come. But that's coming up Tuesday. But what do we make of the weekend now that it's over? Again, we said to begin the series, hey, 5 out of 7 on this homestand feels like what you need if you're the Cardinals because it's a chance to make some moves. The schedule in June has some friendly spots that you can take advantage of, but no friendlier than a 4-gamer at home against the Colorado Rockies. And the Cardinals treaded some more water is all they were able to do. They won 2 of 4. And today on Sunday was a picturesque win. 5-1 starting rotation was Pallante. He did a great job. Didn't allow any runs. Bullpen, 4 innings, 1 run. Couldn't ask for much more than that. The one run that they did allow was John King in the 9th inning. He gave up the run on a couple of hits, and then he bared down to get the final 2 outs so that they didn't need to get Ryan Helsley or anybody else any more hot and stretched out there in the bullpen than they were already thinking they might need to be. This did not get into the scenario where the Cardinals were willing to go to the pen, and that is a win because you were able to get rest for the triumvirate today, and they're all going to get to rest on Monday. And you figure they'll all 3 be ready to rock and roll come Tuesday night at Busch Stadium if somehow the Cardinals are able to get to Paul Skeens and get a lead in that game. But that's not really what we're talking about here today. My point, though, is you got what you wanted from the starter. You got what you could have hoped for from the bullpen. The offense scores 5 runs. You get some power from Alec Burleson. He hits his 9th home run of the season, has looked really good for the Cardinals in that number 2 hole. Again, runners in scoring position continues to be, every single game it's like this. It's one for something, right? Doesn't it feel like that's the case for the Cardinals this year? Today, you got 5 runs, and that's good on your 10 hits. Probably with 10 hits and 2 walks, you'd like to maybe get a little bit more than 5 runs, but 5 is still a good number. Rarely am I going to complain about 5 on behalf of the Cardinals because, it's more than the 3 that is sort of the prerequisite. This team can beat that 3.5 line. They're going to win more games than they're going to lose when they do that. And if they can't beat it, well, it's going to be a long year. And too many times this year, we've seen the Cardinals not get over that hump. This series was really more about the pitching issues, right? You just had a blow-up by Andrew Kittredge on Saturday. You scored enough runs to meet the threshold that I'm talking about here, but you didn't win the game because a guy who's usually very reliable in your bullpen ended up not being. And again, it's not that they had a great game on Saturday offensively, but they did technically score above the number of runs that I consistently say, hey, you got to beat 3.5. And if you do, you've given yourself a level best chance to win. But we talked plenty about how Saturday that was not an acceptable performance by the offense because literally 3 of the Cardinals' runs came on one bad throw by Alauris Montero, whose name I still have a ton of trouble saying now that I know that that's how it's pronounced. But anyway, offensively, the Cardinals did enough in this one. I am going to look up the runners in scoring position updated numbers, though, because it feels like one of those things that on the days it doesn't get them, we're sitting here going, well, at least it didn't get them. And on the days it does get them, we're going, see, this is why they're losing games. And I think we are way past the point where Ollie Marmol had said, look, I don't think we have a risk problem. I think we just generally as an offense are not where we want to be. Guys aren't comfortable taking the right at-bats. That was close to, I think, a month ago. That was like early to maybe mid-May when I remember Ollie Marmol giving that quote when he was asked about runners in scoring position woes. And where the Cardinals are at now as a team overall is still not where you want to be offensively on the year, but they're 21st in OPS. But remember, like, they were way, way, way down there, like bottom 5 in basically every category there before they went on that run, 12 of 15. Batting average, they're 18th in baseball on the season, so they're still not top half in anything that's important. I'll find runs scored as well. But it's just like, I think there is enough. They're 26th in runs scored. They've played a few fewer games than a lot of teams, but that is just, their scoring has been, it's just not been consistent enough. And I understand there are injuries, but every team's going to have injuries. We're not going to sit here in 2024 and tout injuries as the reason that we should let the Cardinals offense off the hook for having a season that is right now pitting them in the bottom half or worse. You know, you could say bottom 10 about some of these categories. You could say bottom 5 in runs scored. I just don't think that that's a reasonable thing to be, well, we can make the excuse because of injury. And even if it is Wilson Contreras, who is your best hitter, and even if it is Lars Nootbaar, who is supposed to be a big contributor, you know, Jordan Walker's not hurt, but he's not here, right? Tommy Edman hasn't come back yet, although John Mozeliak apparently told the folks on Blogger Day yesterday that he was going to come back this month. That's news to everybody else, but that's great that they were able to get that scoop because John Mozeliak doesn't have he doesn't show his face at Busch Stadium to the assembled media in terms of a group scrum. I guess it's going to have to happen coming up in Birmingham if he doesn't do it before that. It'll have to happen probably on that trip, so maybe there will be some more updates from that, but I thought the Blogger group did a nice job. I saw several of the tweets about different little tidbits and nuggets that were interesting to know, and that was one of them about Tommy Edman potentially coming back. Maybe there's a timeline this month. Would be nice for the Cardinals to see, but I just don't think you can look at that and say, well, injuries are why we're bad, because every team deals with them, and you had to anticipate that there'd be some level of that coming into the year, and especially with Tommy Edman, because you could continue to just be an ostrich and stick your head in the sand and continually and indefinitely insist that his return to the roster was just around the corner, and then days turn into weeks, turn into months, and he's still not really progressing. Now he's progressing, hopefully with no more setbacks, because the next setback probably ends his season, because it would be a really bad sign if he has another one as far as, what the situation is with that wrist. So hopefully that's not something that we end up having to talk about. But the Cardinals knew going into spring training that, hey, this was a situation for Tommy Edman, and they public-facing continued to express confidence that everything would be fine. And it certainly went a lot worse and took a lot longer than they thought it would, which is maybe nobody's fault. But my point, more generally speaking, is you could have anticipated that there would be some attrition, and injuries are no excuse, right? Injuries happen to every team. But this is a Cardinals team that's bottom half in basically every offensive category, but they're 28th in average with runners in scoring position. They're hitting .215 with RISP this year. Only the White Sox and the Athletics are worse in what I consider clutch situations in all of MLB. And I understand that, there was a rating that came out that, the Cardinals are actually, their clutch rating is this or that. I don't care. I don't know where they're coming up with that with this team that is as bad as it's been with runners in scoring position. Maybe they're talking about, game situation with that clutch rating. I forget even if that was Fangraphs or who put this out, that the Cardinals actually rated pretty favorably in whatever clutch metrics they had come up with. And so maybe that's, it's a tight game late and the Cardinals are able to turn it around. Like, they have won a number of close games and they've done it with some key moments late. But just generally, clutch is, are there ducks on the pond and can you drive them in? And the answer for that has been no for the Cardinals, even though they've probably gotten the guys on base at a rate pretty close to league average overall. .215 is their average with RISP. Their OPS is .611, which is 29th. So before, their OPS was actually a little better than their batting average with runners in scoring position, which meant, all right, you're maybe not getting the hit as often, but you're at least driving, double, triple homer when you do, so you have maybe a higher slug, or maybe they were taking some bases loaded walks. I don't know. That really doesn't help you much unless the bases are loaded. If you're taking a walk with RISP, that doesn't do a whole lot. So it's got to be batting average that you look at, and the Cardinals don't rate favorably. 28th, 29th in OPS. But overall, I'm curious where the Cardinals rate in OBP, because I'm going to guess it's not terrible. Yeah, they're 20th, so it's not good. They're a .307 on base percentage for the season, tied with Colorado for 19th. Cardinals must be just a tick behind on the percentage points. So that's not good, but that's higher than their rating in almost every other category. Higher than they perform in batting average, certainly higher than they perform in slug. I haven't looked at it, but it's got to be. They're 23rd in slug. They're down there 21st or whatever it is in OPS. So it's just been an offense that has not really performed on the whole. And, it kind of goes back to that question that one of the ones that Derek Gould asked yesterday about the middle of the order. That's the one where Ollie went with the candy shop quote. But the middle of the order has to be what drives it for the Cardinals, because that's what contenders do. And it just has not been the case this year. Goldschmidt went 1 for 3 today with a walk, so he was on twice. Arenado 2 for 4. That's nice, but you're talking base hits and not a lot of power. That's why the OPS is still in the 600s for both guys. Goldie's hitting .229, Arenado .252. The middle order has to drive the thing, and Gorman was over today, and his OPS is down to .778 as he has slid over the past series for the most part. But look, that's your middle of the order, and so even though you get the win today, how are Cardinals fans feeling about this team? Because I still think, despite today's win, you should be doing this to the Rockies. This one was honestly what all 4 games should have looked like. Maybe you score a little more than 5 runs in some of them, and the Cardinals did, obviously, the 8-5 win. They scored that day. But it shouldn't be that difficult to have complete efforts against this team that is just not a very good ball club. And the Cardinals, I would say, had a pretty complete effort. They still struggled with RISP on Sunday, but like I mentioned, the pitching side was good. They still scored. They still got on base, and they did enough, at least to ensure that they didn't need the triumvirate to hardly get loose in this game. Hilsey might have warmed up at some point in the ninth, but I wasn't sure on that. But he didn't have to come in. So this was what it was supposed to look like all weekend. How are we feeling, Cardinals fans, now that it's over and they did get the split, so you can feel like, hey, they won today. That's nice. But it's still not really a satisfactory result, is it? It can't be. Not to split with the Rockies at home in 4 games. Their record on the season, 23-42. And you let them get 2 from you as you really needed to be separating yourselves in this wild card conversation or in this divisional hierarchy in the NL Central, where the Cardinals come in, at least for the moment, they're ahead of the Pirates. I don't know if the Pirates play on Monday. I guess they don't. So they'll travel to St. Louis. The Cardinals, obviously, going to stick around at home, and both teams will have the off day. Nice for the Cardinals to have an off day in the middle of a homestand, though. That's different because you don't have to travel. This should really be a rest recuperation type of day for the Cardinals, and guys can maybe, get with their families, do a little bit of whatever they want to do. I do think that there could be some benefit to that because it's not something you really see a whole heck of a lot. But the Cardinals will go into the series against Pittsburgh up on them in the division standings by a half game, and they are percentage points separated from the Cubs and Reds, who are 32 and 34. The Cardinals are 31 and 33. So all are technically 6.5 games back, but they've played a different number of games. The Cardinals could have been in second place alone had they just taken one more of these games from the Rockies, because they'd be sitting right at 500 if they had been able to do that. Instead, they're 2 games below. They just cannot get off of this magnet that sits them just a shade below the 500 mark. And if you can't get to 500 and consistently stay there and then find ways to dig above and beyond that, it's kind of hard to envision this season really going anywhere. And if you can't do it against the Rockies, when are they going to do it? And maybe that's just a fallacy, and it doesn't really matter because they were able to sweep the Orioles, and they'll have series against tougher teams, and they'll win some of those series, and it can be okay. But you're not doing yourself any favors if you're not at least taking advantage of and trying to beat up on the teams that are just way down in the dumps like the Rockies are. All these other teams that are in the wild card mix, it's going to be crazy. You've got the Padres below 500 by a half a game, but they're in the second wild card spot. It's really weird that the Atlanta Braves, who have been struggling, they've lost 3 in a row. How is it that they played, is that right, 6 fewer games than the San Diego Padres? I don't know how that has happened, but it has. Atlanta's got only 1 additional win compared to the Padres, but they're 7 games over 500. Padres are 34 and 35. The Braves are 35 and 28. Just a complete non-equivalent schedule going on right there. Doesn't really matter that much. But Atlanta's not playing very well right now. They're still way above 500. They're going to be in the playoffs. There's no real doubt about that. But the Padres below 500, the Cubs, Reds, and Giants are all 2 games under. The Cardinals are 2 games under, having played 2 fewer games than those teams. And the Pirates are 3 games under. And then you kind of sift a little bit lower. The D-backs are 4 under, only a game out of a wild card spot. The Nats, a game and a half out at 5 under. And then you start to, that might be the line. I guess the Mets could go on a run. They're 28 and 36. They're 8 games under. They're only 3 games out. So technically, I wouldn't call them out of it. But the Rockies and Marlins are done. They're 8.5 and 9.5 out of a very attainable wild card. So there are really only 2 NL teams that you can just completely ignore. The Mets are very close to that, although they're only 3 games out. The thing is, they've got to pass 4 or 5 teams to get into the spot. So it's just a lot would have to go in their favor for all of those teams to continue to be bad, unless the Mets really go on a run. But my point is, this wild card thing is wide open. Maybe we just have to accept that the Brewers are going to win this division. They're 11 games over. And I just don't know how they play badly enough. They've got a really good home record at 18 and 10. I just don't know how they play badly enough the rest of the way for anybody else to come up and beat them, unless that team is taking it. They're not going to have it handed to them. And I just don't know if the Cardinals are the type of team to take it, because splitting against the Rockies does not give me any sort of confidence that that's the kind of team that we're dealing with. I know that's probably how a lot of Cardinals fans feel too, but it feels important to say it. At some point, you go on the run, and I get it. They had one run against a group of some pretty good teams mixed in there when they went 12 and 3 over that 15-game stretch right after they got to a season worst 9 games below 500 against Milwaukee during that series. They won the final game in Milwaukee, and then they went on a run from there. The Red Sox were involved. The Orioles were involved. Angels were mixed in there. The Cardinals played some good teams, some teams that aren't so good. But now that they are basically back to an even level. They're still a bit below 500, but it's within striking distance. They seem to be just kind of treading water. And this was the part of the schedule that they were supposed to be able to rise. And if they had done it this weekend, they would be in second place and they would be welcoming the Pirates a little closer to the Brewers and with maybe more of a maybe even a stranglehold on a wild card spot. I mean, change a couple of things here and there, and that's where the Cardinals would be. But they didn't accomplish it. They didn't do those things that we thought were set out before them to rather easily attain. And we're continuing to wonder, I think, at this point, like, are they contenders? This is what contenders do. The Cardinals aren't doing those things consistently enough at this point. So what would have to change? It's interesting that John Mozeliak, talking to the blogger community, had said, that they're going to be shopping to buy at the deadline to add to the team. That's great to hear. I still need to listen back to the whole Blogger Day presser. I guess you could call it a presser. The availability with Mo. I know Viva Alberto's had it out in podcast form, so I want to listen to that. I haven't gotten a chance to hear it all yet. So it's nice to hear, though, because I saw the tweets about it, that Mo is basically saying, look, they're not looking to sell. They're looking to add to the team, which I think you have to say that at this point. If they lose 7 in a row and are seemingly out of the race, things will maybe be treated differently. But for now, you gain nothing by saying, well, we'll wait and see. No. Just tell them you're going to buy, even if it's a lie. I mean, that's PR 101. You need to not rock the boat right now. But we can sort of envision what the spots are that the Cardinals could be looking for. I saw, again, I haven't listened to it, but I saw that he said center field, right-handed hitting center fielder could be an option, which, again, seems like a knife to the heart of Dylan Carlson because he is a switch hitter who has historically, from the right side, done a better job. Tommy Edman, historically, from the right side, has done a better job. But they're kind of looking for that off the bench, I think, and they don't really have that role filled out if Dylan Carlson's not that role. So we'll kind of see. And again, I don't want to make too much of the Blogger Day comments by Mo until I've actually been able to listen to all of them, which is something I'll be able to go back and do hopefully on Monday. And then I was thinking maybe live stream on Monday night on the off day, but we'll see. If I do it, it'll be in the 10 o'clock range probably. But let me know on the comments here if that would be something you guys would like. It's always just a matter of, like, is it going to get enough viewership that it makes it worth it to me? Because it ends up going over an hour typically, whereas these podcasts a little more tight than that. And I just don't want to do it if it's not going to be worth it, honestly. Just going to be straight up with everybody. But if you think live stream and you want it, then let me know because that'll influence whether or not I do it. But I will try to listen to the Blogger Day stuff and then maybe discuss a little bit of that or even play some of it if I don't live stream. I can kind of play some of those comments on Monday's podcast. But anyway, continuing, the idea that John Mozeliak says the Cardinals would be looking to add, even if they're just sort of in the feeler stage at this point, is encouraging because it's what should be the case. It should not be excusable for the Cardinals to do anything less than go for it and make the damn playoffs this year because it's so very attainable. Even as the Cardinals, I think, play a little bit below expectations, a little bit below maybe what their true talent level is. But then again, we can't say that for sure. I'm not guaranteeing you that that's what it is. This just might be how talented they are. At a certain point, you have to accept that you are what you are in the same way that last year's team was a 91-loss team. And while I do think they underachieved, you can't just say that it was a great roster because they weren't even close last year. I think this roster is certainly better than last year's roster, largely because I think they stabilized the pitching a little bit more. But it's also interesting to think about, like, as much as we hated the pitching last year for good reason, Jack Flaherty is now stunning with the Tigers. Like, he's doing a great job. Jordan Montgomery has been terrible with the D-backs, but I think Scott Boras screwed him. And the whole problem there is that he didn't have a spring training, but he was out dealing for the Rangers winning the World Series last year. So, like, two of the guys that they had were super capable. Monty was performing, but it wasn't enough. Flaherty was not consistently performing. And they've replaced those two guys. Basically, you could say, whether it's Lynn Gibson or whether it's Sonny Gray and Gibson or Sonny Gray and Lynn, however you frame it, they've swapped in those two guys and swapped out the other two because obviously you had none of those guys after July 31st last year, but the team was already so bad. That's why you made the decision to trade away people from your rotation, is because it wasn't good enough and you weren't going to make the playoffs anyway. But it's kind of interesting to think about, like, did you really gain a lot there by swapping out those names, if you had brought back these same guys, Flaherty and Montgomery, would you be in a better spot, or would they have not thrived as much? Obviously, Monty not currently thriving, but he would have had spring training in St. Louis, so maybe he would have been able to match what Sonny Gray is giving you. And maybe Flaherty would have, I think for him, it's always been health. And so if he's healthy and throwing 94, 95 instead of 90, 89, 91, that tells me he's in a better place physically. Maybe Flaherty could have been doing this for the Cardinals if he had come back and they had came to an agreement. Right? Like, you lose Jordan Hicks, but that was just a stud back-end reliever, that was not a starter that you lost, even though that's the role he's performing in now. Cardinals weren't going to use him that way. So I'm just trying to compare it to last year's team. The real big difference is, like, I think if you said Lynn and Gray swapped in for Monty and Flaherty, you have swapped in the model of consistency Kyle Gibson for Adam Wainwright, who was the worst pitcher in baseball last year. If not, he was close to it. He was awful, right? And he was injured, so it's not all, we don't have to rehash that. But that, like, is that alone, if the other two are kind of net neutral, is that alone a swap that turns the Cardinals from 71 and 91 to being right back in the mix playoff-wise? Or does it put the Cardinals just kind of about where they are, sputtering around 500, treading water, maybe a little bit below 500, haven't been able to get over the hump? There are definitely other differences to the roster, like the bullpen is different, but a lot of the guys they brought in for the bullpen are injured. We don't see Keenan Middleton. Gallegos has been a net negative compared to what he was last year, he wasn't great last year, but he's been a lot worse this year and now injured. They took out maybe some back-end starting depth kind of guys that were not very good. Hudson and Woodford were both bad last year, and they've been even worse this year in their new homes. So that was maybe like addition by subtraction to get rid of them. Kisner was good backup catcher-wise. Herrera's performing about the same offensively as Kisner did last year. He's certainly worse defensively than Kisner was, and Kisner wasn't a bona fide. Although I did see Kisner's hitting like 100. He's not performing offensively right now with Texas, but I saw a whole thread on Twitter about his framing has been like really, really good. Most improved in baseball compared to what he did last year. And they did side-by-side video, and I saw it, and I was like, actually, I'm not an expert on pitch framing, but he does look like he's a lot smoother with it. That's kind of a random aside. My point is, like, this roster, a little bit different from last year. Gibson for Waino is the biggest swap that makes a difference. You can nitpick on the other stuff. You're getting worse versions of Goldie and Arenado. Mason Wynn is obviously the biggest swap. You swapped out an underperforming DeYoung last year and a Wynn that was bad for 6 weeks to end the season for a guy who probably has a case for being an all-star right now, Mason Wynn. 2 for 5 with 2 RBIs today. He's hitting .306 with a .790 OPS. So he's been fantastic. But otherwise, I mean, Wilson's injured, Nootbaar's injured. Those things happen. Burleson's been a more of a net positive than he was last year. Was kind of lost in the shuffle last year, and right now he's carrying you pretty much as one of your mainstays in the lineup. So, like, we can just dissect the roster all we want. Is this Cardinals team a contender? All in all, I think they're better than they were last year, but right now, the answer would be no if it weren't for the piss-poor National League wildcard standings. I mean, all these teams are mediocre the way they stand right now. Any one of them can go on a run and play better baseball and become a solid team. None of these teams you could call good right now. But that almost serves to, I hope, implore the Cardinals to make a move, make multiple moves, and you do enough to where you're clearly head and shoulders above these teams roster-wise, and that it's worthwhile, and you end up in a wild card series. And I think one of the moves might have to be to add a starter who isn't just a number 5, but like a number 2. So that when you get into the wild card series, you can put that guy behind Sonny Gray. And hopefully Sonny Gray, ends up performing back like he did in April instead of what we've seen from him over his past 6 starts. But that might be the way, is just to say, look, we can make a move. I want to see a blockbuster with Chicago. I really do. I don't know what it's going to take. I'm talking about the White Sox. I'm talking about Luis Robert. I'm talking about Garrett Crochet. I'm talking about Michael Kopech out of the bullpen. Maybe there's another reliever that makes more sense. I don't know what it would cost, and I don't even want to get into the names yet because it's early June, and I just don't need the flack of saying I would trade Jordan Walker for that package. But I'm not ignoring any possible way to improve the Cardinals. I don't think it's blasphemy to say that, yeah, it's worth talking about. No prospect should be off the table. There are major leaguers that would be off the table. Mason Wynn is probably the top of that list. But, I mean, there are a change of scenery, blockbuster type of trade, like a bigger trade than the Colby Rasmus trade, because that was Colby Rasmus needs out of here. He needs a change of scenery. He's a former regarded prospect, and he's still got enough juice that we can move him for a package. But the package the Cardinals brought in that deal in 2011 was, I mean, island of misfit toys. They worked out for them great. They needed a starter. Edwin Jackson, come be a starter. They needed some bullpen help. All right, throw Scrabble in here, and we're going to bring in, it was nothing spectacular. I think this would be a bigger version of that if they came knocking on the White Sox door for multiple talented players. But, like, if you can one-stop shop, and I just don't see John Mozeliak doing it. It's just been a rarity in recent years. Like, we haven't seen those types of trades. But if you can one-stop shop and you maybe have to give up a big piece that nobody wants to give up, and a lot of people are going to be against it. Cardinals fans are going to be against it because they already believe, a lot of you guys already believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that this team isn't going anywhere, and patching it up with a trade is not going to change that trajectory this year. All it's going to serve to do is mess things up for tomorrow, mess up the future by trading a young, controllable asset for, whatever it is that they trade for. I don't personally feel that way. I feel like if you can make a blockbuster for the types of names that I'm talking about from the White Sox, and I'm not sitting here telling you it's plausible. I'm not even sitting here telling you it's possible. I just am seeing the same scuttlebutt everybody else is about the White Sox being willing to listen on some of these. Now, they said for Luis Robert, they want a package bigger than what the Juan Soto deal was for the Nationals. That's never going to happen. Juan Soto is a better player, was performing better at the time than Robert is right now. I just don't personally see that. But there are some, there could be some interesting names that the Cardinals could part with. And I'm not really wanting to dive too much into the speculation on that just yet. I want to hear a little bit more that there could be smoke to a fire on that. And I don't think there is right now. I'm just dot connecting and going, man, that could be a one-stop shop where suddenly the Cardinal roster, if you stack it up against these other teams that are 32 and 34 and they're below 500, suddenly I would be like, yeah, I'm taking the Cardinals over most of those rosters. If you get them a starter, that's a fifth starter, but more like a number two. If you get him a legit center fielder, and maybe Tommy Edman is that, but we'll see. And I'm not knocking Michael Ciani, but I think he's more of a fourth outfielder, a guy you can bring off the bench for defense, bring off the bench for pinch running, bring off the bench for a bunt. As much as it's kind of funny to think about, he's a good bunter. And if there's an 8th inning, 9th inning, 10th inning where you need that runner over to third, there's utility to having Michael Ciani off the bench. So I would just wonder, and we know that the bullpen could use all the help that it can get because I think you've got some reliable guys, but maybe not as many as you'd want to go into war with in a playoff race. So that's why I keep bringing it up, that I think it would be interesting. But what do you think? Is it even worth it to try and add to this Cardinals team? I know there's going to be a lot of sentiment out there that the answer is no, but I don't know. I don't think it should be acceptable to tell fans. And look, I think they also got to sell tickets for next year, and they can't fizzle out this year the way they did last year. And because they're already going the wrong direction on ticket sales. Saturday was the lowest recorded paid attendance at Busch Stadium, the current Busch Stadium, I think ever, if I'm not mistaken. It was, if not, it's been a long, long time. Of course, that doesn't count 2021 in the COVID year because of the COVID restrictions. But that's jarring that they are, even on Saturdays, they're talking 34,000. It used to be back in like 2016 when I started covering, and toward the very end, you started to see the attendance dip. But before that, coming off of the 2015 100-win season and the first portion of 2020 or 2016, I'm saying, if it was even pushing 40,000, you were going, what's going on here? And then it was like, oh, the Cardinals are going to keep announcing 40,000, even though we can clearly see that the stadium's not nearly that full. But now it feels like they're almost straining to do that with 30,000. It's a completely different, there's apathy out there, and you're not wrong to have it. But let me know if you think, hey, this is beyond fixing, or hey, let's see them just have a little bit of a spark, or the front office can be the group to provide the spark, and you've got a redundant roster right now in several ways, and maybe you fix that by infusing some life into this team. I'd be real curious to see how y'all feel about it. But Andre Palante, like speaking about today's game, I know I've talked a lot about things other than the game. The simple version of what happened today in the game is that they won the way they were supposed to, and it was easy. It was not close. It was not in doubt. They handled their business. But Palante, 5 innings. Look, you get another lineup where there's some lefties and switch hitters in there, just like there was against the Reds. That makes life a lot easier on Palante. Just didn't have to deal with quite as many tough righties in this lineup. And he only gave up 3 hits. And he did much better on the bases on balls department. Just 1 walk, and he struck out 6. He was very good today. Yes, it was only for 5 innings, but he's your number 5 starter. You can live with that. I don't know if it ends up being sustainable into August, September, and into October, which obviously October, you're not really looking at a scenario where you're needing a number 5 starter by that point. But for right now, like, the Houston game was a nightmare. And if you're toggling back and forth between shutout outings and nightmare outings, I don't know how good you feel about that. But, every 5th day, are you giving them a chance to win? No, every 10 days you are, though. I don't know. I think you need to try, if you're Andre Palante, to avoid those blow-up games like he had against the Astros, 6 runs in 3 innings. But the other 2 have been genuinely good. So he's going to get another one, and the Cardinals just need to go ahead and say it right away. Stop messing around, waiting till the very bitter end. It's silly. It's ridiculous. Just say, yeah, he's starting the next time. And if he starts pitching bad and you want to make a change, then do it. The indecision makes him look bad. Just my opinion. Makes the team look like they don't have any other options they trust, and they probably don't. But, stand behind Palante a little bit after today's outing. And look, I'll credit myself. That sounds a little conceited. But when they had the game and he gave up 6 runs in 3 innings and everybody said, oh, you got to get him out of the rotation, I criticized the Cardinals for not announcing that day that he was in 5 days from then. Because I thought, no, you give him more than 1. If he has a second bad one, okay, that's fine. But this guy's only 25 years old, and it's always bugged me the way that the Cardinals have had the short leash on. It's almost like it's Illuminati, or it's like a fraternity hazing sort of thing. What's the secret society that Illuminati or whatever it is, where you're like, we don't really, this guy's from AAA Memphis. We really don't want him to get into the club. We're not going to say he's the starter. We're not going to say he's the 5th starter. He's just going to be the guy that pitches every 5th day. But we're not going to admit it. Like, what do you gain from that? Say what it is, own it, give the guy that confidence boost, and then if he needs it taken away at some point, take it away. But the Cardinals, I think, have let a number of starters go from not really ever finding out enough about him. And I think, like, Jordan Hicks is an example of that. Because anytime he got a chance to start, it was brief, and then they would say, well, we're going to criticize all the things he does wrong. But then when guys like Miles Michaelis go for months at a time and struggle, there's nothing to be said about that. Well, no, he has to stay in the rotation. And, like, Michaelis has pitched better in the last 6 weeks, so it's fine. I'm not saying that's wrong. But why doesn't that courtesy sometimes extend to the guys who are less proven, who need to be working through some issues and figuring things out and have the leeway to do it at times? So for me, Palante should have gotten this start, and credit to the Cardinals for ultimately giving it to him, but it was like pulling teeth to give him the chance. They were looking for every other option, talking through it, and constantly playing, the veil of secrecy game. For a little while, it's beneficial to do it that way because, yeah, technically you could use Palante out of the bullpen, and that affords you a little bit more roster flexibility. But it's just not a great. Let the guy know his role. I think you're going to get more out of him. It's the same conversation I had with Liberatore, or about Liberatore, when the Cardinals were considering him for the bullpen for 4 days in a row, and then he starts on the 5th day. That's just a weird spot to be as a pitcher. Let the guys know their role. So Palante was good. He's going to get the next start. I told you he'd get this one. He did get it. They just didn't tell you right away. He's going to get the next one, too. Hopefully they are a little bit more upfront about it. 68 pitches is all he needed through 5 innings. He was very efficient. They took him out. I think that was the right move. You had plenty of bullpen guys available. Liberatore did a nice job in a scoreless frame. Fernandez was really good. We hadn't seen him in a little bit. Inning and 2/3. He was sharp. Walked 1, but no hits, and had a K in there. And John King cleaning up the final 4 outs of the game. Cardinal bullpen was good this series outside of Saturday. Allowed 2 total runs outside of the bad. Again, Saturday was a blow-up, but the other 3 games, they combined for like 13 innings and 2 runs. And overall, they still had an ERA below 3 for the series, so that was good to see. Offensively, we touched on it throughout a little bit, but good to see from Burleson, another home run. He'll bat second for as long as I think he needs to, for as long as Nupar's out, for sure. Crazy to think that back in February when the Cardinals were signing guys like Brandon Crawford, we were looking around going, you sign Carpenter, you sign Crawford. Is Burley going to make the team? How does he find a spot? Where does he fit? Well, injuries happened, and, in that regard, it's a good thing they did, because I don't know if the Cardinals would have really had the room to give Burley this chance to thrive. And suddenly, after sticking with him and believing in him for last year, this was a hot topic of a lot of Cardinals fans going, who is Alec Burleson and why should we care? Looking at the numbers and going, this guy's not very good. But the Cardinals saw something more. He's a good contact-oriented hitter. He doesn't strike out much. And now that he's adding power to that, and for Ollie Marmol, he said, look, he's just got to be a little more selective with the strikes he swings at. He's such a good contact maker that, and this was something they worked on and talked about in the offseason and in spring as well, such a good contact maker that they almost wanted him to shrink the zone a little bit and not swing at some of the pitches that he couldn't do damage with. And I think he's taken to that a little, and now he's got 9 homers on the year. Could end up with be a 20, 25 home run guy. I don't think that's too far-fetched. So he's been really good. I want to credit the good situational baseball that scored the first run of the day for the Cardinals. Carlson had a double. Donnie advanced him on a flyout. Pages drives him in on a sac fly. Situational baseball. Fundamentals, right? We don't call it attention to detail. We know that's not the phrase that we're supposed to use now. But fundamentals, that's fundamental baseball. It's not a defensive play, but it's still fundamentals. It's all part of playing crisp, clean baseball. Burleson's home run, great bat control. That pitch was at the top of the zone. It was 89. It was a flat pitch, but swung an uppercut on a pitch that was at the tippy top of the strike zone. He's got great bat control. Mason Wynn, just a hitter. His 2 RBI hits served into left field was, just all you needed in that spot if you're the Cardinals. Runners on second and third, do your job. Mason Wynn's been as good at that as anybody. I'd leave him leadoff. There are maybe some rare instances where Donovan fits back in there, but I almost don't mind Donovan batting 6th or 7th, and I wouldn't put him much lower than that because I do think he's one of their better players that still has a chance to come out of the struggles. He's only OPSing 683. He's better than that, but I would want his bat in there a little bit more. Like it was Carlson was 6 today, Donnie was 7. I would flip that personally, but we're not, that's a small potatoes kind of issue. But the other couple things I want to mention, we are veering toward personal catcher territory with Pallante and Pages. The first game that Pallante pitched against the Reds was Pages behind the dish, and Ollie went out of his way today to mention that they paired well together in that Cincy game and did so today as well. Complimented that Pages called a great game behind home plate. So that's 2 scoreless outings with those 2 together. The one time, and granted, the Houston lineup is better than any of the other 2, the Reds and the Rockies. But the other game was Pallante with Herrera, and that one was not a good one. Granted, lineup differences, a lot of righties in that Houston lineup that can burn you. But I think you'll see Pallante and Pages together 5 days from now. Veering toward personal catcher territory. Just based on the comments from Ollie this afternoon after the game, I am going to predict that Pages will be behind the plate again the next time Pallante starts. Mostly 4-seam fastball and curveball that worked for Andre today, by the way. He only had, according to the MLB.com game story that I checked out, which is kind of cool. They put like little video clips on there to catch you up if you missed something, and I always watch through it just to make sure I'm on top of everything that I thought I needed to be when doing this podcast. But he only had like 6 sinkers thrown and 4 sliders as they registered. And other than that, it was all fastball, curveball. He throws that knuckle curve, had some strikeouts on it. That's a pitch that was working for him. I don't know if the 2-seamer is part of the mix or if he kind of abandoned that for this game after what happened in Houston. But regardless, Pallante did his job, man. Scoreless outing. It's all you need from the number 5 spot. But is it going to be the sustainability factor long-term this season, or do the Cardinals still need to consider, hey, it's not even so much the back of the rotation you need to address. You need the number 2. You need another ace if you're really going to be viable for October. Maybe that's how a lot of Cardinals fans feel. But that's really all I have to say about today's game. Cardinals got the series split. It's nothing to celebrate, but it's always like you're sitting here feeling like it could have been worse. Should have been a lot better, but technically could have been worse. But a season of could have been worse is going to end up in 78 and 84. I'm telling you right now, 79 and 83, something like that. That's not going to end up being good enough. So if I sit here and say could have been worse every podcast, realize that that's not the compliment that some people think it is, because it means that they're really going to end up a shade below 500, and I'm going to predict it right now. The 3 wild cards in the NL, none of them will finish below 500. Minimum 500, and probably all will at least win 82 games. even though that's not the case right now. Teams are going to make a decision going into the deadline, and the ones that go for it are going to be rewarded largely. That's kind of the way I look at it. And the Cardinals, they just need to be one of them. Mo, this needs to be the deadline that he takes more seriously than he ever has in terms of not only setting them up for this year's success, but maybe with an eye on the future, but not too big of an eye on the future. Don't be afraid to get rentals and go win this thing, because I think it is still there for the taking. And even if this team doesn't profile as one that can thrive in October, they owe it to Cardinals fans to get this team to October and let that play out. Let that loss play out that we all think would be there, right? And now maybe a couple of moves at the deadline changes my opinion on this team not being able to go deep. But I think that's the way a lot of people feel is, why does it matter? They'll win 83 games and sneak in with a wild card, but why should that be celebrated if they can't do anything when they get there? And I hear you on that. But I also think that after the lowering of the bar that's taken place, it's incumbent upon the Cardinals in that front office to get them back into the playoffs. Because the bar, it'll be lower. It'll be lower than it was a number of years ago when you thought division should be the standard and then deep October runs are the standard. But if that's not something attainable right at this moment, I get it. You can be mad about it. But they owe a playoff run to this city. It's my opinion. You asked for patience all year, Mo, last year. Didn't end up working out, and then you scurried, abandoned ship, didn't publicly face the music after the season. And this year, as I mentioned yesterday at the end of the podcast, you've talked to the bloggers, and that's all you've done since opening day in terms of a group of media availability. And in Mo's mind, he said the same thing last year when he was criticized for not being made available. And he said, well, I don't understand why people are saying that. You know, I talk to KMOX all the time. There are stories like, Katie will write a story, Derek will write a story. Those are communications that take place behind the scenes, and those are important. Those beat writers that engage in that regularly do a great job. But it's a different thing to have an open communication where, hey, any question can be asked, which is not to say that any question can't be asked in those private conversations. But, he can decline to answer a question that he doesn't like, perhaps, and it's not going to be on camera. It's not going to be seen by everybody and has the potential to embarrass. So to put himself out there in a way that he hasn't recently, look, like I said, it's going to happen in Birmingham. It's going to have to. But before then, I don't know if it's going to. And, I just think that's a bad look. So it's something I'm going to continue to harp on a little bit. I don't think it's the end-all be-all, but it is something that's like, all right, you've asked for patience from these fans, but now you're not regularly acting as that conduit, acting as that communicator to the fan base of where things stand and what the expectations are and where you want to go from here. So just go ahead and let the actions do the talking, and I think fans will be fine with that. But I think it's owed that this team and this front office pursues moves, and it should start today. Be creative with it, too. They might hurt. I don't know that everybody universally back in 2011 said it was a great deal when they traded Colby Rasmus that day. They might have said, who the hell are these guys? Who's Corey Patterson? Well, they won the World Series that year. And it doesn't matter if you win the press conference the day of the trade, but make the moves that maybe it's a little bold, maybe it's a little outside the box, but if you think it makes his team better, I think John Mozeliak, as long as he's in this role, still has the license to make those types of trades. So I advocate for them and say, let's get a little chaotic. Who knows? That's my thoughts. Cardinals fans, tell me yours in the comments below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to follow my content all season long here on YouTube. Definitely subscribe on Spotify, too. The podcast is called B-Schaeff Daily. If you follow on Spotify, I've got up to like 107 reviews on Spotify. It's like a 4.9. I really appreciate the positive reviews. The negative ones, don't do those. I'm just kidding. Do whatever you want, but review the podcast, follow it on Spotify, get those numbers up. I appreciate you guys so much for being along for the ride this year covering Cardinals baseball. That's going to do it for this edition of the show. We will talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.